To Matthew chapter 15. We'll take a devotional thought there in just a second. Matthew chapter 15. We have classes that will be ready. John will dismiss our younger ones to that after our devotional period. And then we have our discussion here tonight. The fancy furniture behind me. We'll discuss tonight's panel is Terry Oakley and Autumn Richardson. So I'm excited about that. I think we'll have some good discussion when that comes around. But before we have our devotional, before we continue on and send our younger ones to class, let's bow with a word of prayer. And after we begin together by praying, then I'll turn it over to John, and he can lead us in a song before the invitation is offered. Let's bow. Dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this day, and we do recognize with humility how good you are to us. We're thankful for this weather. We are aware that more severe weather is likely to come through over the next day or two, and I ask you to be with us, keep us safe, help us to be alert and aware in all things. Help us to look for ways to put you first and to be the kind of people that you want us to be, so that we can be that city set on a hill and shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fall and give us the strength to stand and try again. We offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. John?
Good evening. If you would like to mark 214. 214. We'll sing that song as invitation. And I do have two big Band-Aids on my nose. Didn't just said, Uncle John, what's wrong with your nose? Told him I got some briars. Amazes me, my dad and I were talking about how some animals, deer, don't seem to faze me. I just run right through them, but I stopped when I hit them. 214, have you seen Jesus my Lord? And then we'll sing 166. 166, He is my King. Let's sing the first and the third verses of this song together, please. Let's sing. All day long, Jesus, I am singing. Hear my song, a trouble ever be. All the morning keeps my heart bells ringing. For His love is everything to me. He's my King, and oh, I dearly love Him. He's my King, no other is above Him.
That I found a little bit interesting. Many of you have heard of the French Riviera. It's a beautiful place. It's a high society. It's a luscious, and the apartments you can imagine that overlook the French Riviera, where all these tourists come and like to, enjoy the water and things like that. If you want to own property there, it's obviously pretty expensive. And it's a status symbol. Of course, we know about different status symbols in our lives, and it's obviously a pretty big status symbol to have property on the French Riviera. But for some people, they can't afford all of the niceties of what it's like to live on the French Riviera. One of those status symbols is the ability to have a balcony that overlooks the water. You can go out in the morning with your espresso, I guess, or your fancy, glass of champagne. I don't know, whatever people on the French Riviera do. Shrimp cocktail for breakfast, I guess. I don't know. I've never been there. But the idea is, to be able to show people how fancy, how great your life is, to have a balcony that overlooks French Riviera. Well, not everybody can afford the best of the best, and so they might buy property, they might have an apartment, or they might have something like that in a building, but they can't afford the prestige of one that has a balcony. And so you can find examples of this, people who have painted a balcony picture on the outside of their building overlooking the Riviera. They've even gone so far as to paint a clothesline with clothes hanging on the clothesline dryer to make it look realistic, to live up to that, I guess, that status symbol, I suppose, but to look better than what they are. It reminded me of the words that Jesus says about the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew chapter 15. He scolds them for their traditions, and he says in verse 7, "You are hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men,'" trying to put themselves off as something that they are not, trying to paint themselves as something that they are not, to look better. To seem better. In other places, Jesus will talk about whitewashed tombs and bowls that are clean on the outside but are filthy on the inside. And it reminds us that we have an obligation to pay attention inwardly, not just the outer trappings, not just trying to look the part, not just trying to look like we are holy and righteous, like those folks that paint pictures of balconies on the outside of their building, but those who do the hard work internally to be what we say that we are. Tonight, I'd encourage you to live that kind of authentic life among the people that you interact with this week. Be a Christian. Don't just say that you are. And it will make a difference in your life, and it could make a difference in theirs as well. If you feel the need to respond to the invitation tonight, the invitation is to come and ask for help. The invitation is to come and express regret, repentance, or remorse because you haven't been living the way that you should. Or it's to say, I want to be a Christian. I want to be a follower of Christ. And we can help you do that tonight as well. But if any of those are needs that you need to respond to, then right now is the perfect opportunity. If you'll come forward while we stand together and while we sing.
Have you ever stood at the ocean with the white foam at your feet? Ocean, then I say, you see Jesus my Lord. Have you seen and seen Jesus my Lord? He's here with you. Take a look, open your eyes, he'll show it to you. Have you ever stood at the cross with the man hanging in pain? See the look of love in his eyes, then I say, you see Jesus my Lord. Have you seen Jesus my Lord? He's here with you. Take a look, open your eyes, he'll show it to you. Have you ever stood in the plenty with the Lord there in your midst? See the face of Christ of your brother, then I say, you see Jesus my Lord. Have you seen Jesus my Lord? He's here in plain view. Take a look, open your eyes, he'll show it to you.
Good to see each of you tonight. Hope you've had a good week. If you're visiting with us, we're always glad to have visitors. We want to always encourage you and invite you to come back and be with us. Hope you picked up an opportunity worksheet. I want to remind you Sunday night, in preparation for Last to Leaders, we'll be having a split service. All the men and the young boys will be upstairs. The ladies and the young ladies will be downstairs. We could have ladies up here, but no men in the fellowship hall, so just be mindful of that. Also, if you have not give your waivers and your hotel money to Doug, please get that to him. He needs that ASAP. Autumn says that we should be good on the money for the food, and we thank each and every one of you that have helped in that. If you can help for snacks for the Underwood school teachers and staff, if you can bring individually wrapped snacks by next Wednesday, or see Marcia if you have any questions in regards to that. Please do remember all the ones on our sick list, especially Margie Cox. She continues to improve. We're thankful for that. Continue to remember Dwayne Fulmer. Remember Steve Goodman and Jackie. Steve is very low. Please remember them in your prayers. I want to continue to remember Pancho and Margie. Everything's still going well? Great. Continue to remember the Kimbrell family in our prayers. Bonnie's service was today. We certainly want to remember each of those. And you'll see Susan and Jennifer's and the grandkids' addresses on here. Please take note of that and stay in touch with them. And also remember Carrie Ann Rhodes' family over the passing of her uncle, Mitch Reed. We've got one card to read from Amy Lee. Thank you, and I love coming to Petersville Church. And I want to thank Miss Susie for helping me with my Bible study and for you for caring for me. I love you all. Thank you for inviting me to come to Petersville. Amy, thank you for that card. We're blessed by you being here. Any other announcements before we dismiss to go to our classes? All right. John, I'm going to... Well, I'll get them. The first grade and up, you can be dismissed at this time. Or actually, first grade and down. I said first grade and up. I'm sorry. He said first grade and up. He did. I was just following him. And then everybody else.
That's everybody, right? Everybody's gone to class. This is your last chance. If you don't want to be in here for this discussion, you better get up and go to one of those other kids' classes. No. In the most unintentional, ironic decision I have ever made, we have Terry Oakley and Autumn Richardson up here to talk about rest, which should be interesting. I am excited about it. I appreciate Rogers last week making some adjustments. You know, we couldn't come over here because of the weather. We had to cancel our meeting time together. But Rogers came up earlier in the day and sat with me, and we recorded that. Hopefully you were able to get that viewing. I thought we had a good conversation, and I appreciated him. Of course, Kevin and Shawanda did our first inaugural discussion up here, and the elders said we could keep having class. So that means you must have done a good job. So we are continuing down through. I've got probably about 80% of our panels lined up, individuals who've agreed to come up here next week. It'll be Richard and Chelsea. They're going to come and be on the panel next week. But I've still got some open weeks, and I'm still looking for people that are willing to sit up here and have some discussions with me. And I appreciate your willingness to do that. We've put these videos out on Facebook. I've surprised myself that I have kept these up, the past 2 weeks. If we're still doing that by the 10th week, if it's still up on Thursday, then you really need to be impressed, because I'm not that organized typically. So, but I do want to know, the camera's up here on us, so don't feel, embarrassed. Who's able to watch the video this week of Ralph Gilmore? Who was able to see that? Okay, good. So there are several of you that are taking advantage of that. Several things that we'll talk about tonight will be things from his video that we won't watch here, so it'll still make sense, but the fuller, deeper aspect of it probably would be, you'd get more out of it if during the week you go at home and on Facebook or on your TV or Roku or whatever, watch those videos and get a heads up about what we're talking about. So we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. If you want to go ahead and take your Bible, we'll be in chapter 2 and chapter 4 tonight. As I mentioned, it's Ralph Gilmore. I like to show the video where Doug Burleson introduces our speaker each week. I think that shows us, helps us to demonstrate our appreciation and respect for Freed-Hardeman University, making these videos available for us and this material. So I'll let him introduce Ralph. Ralph Gilmore has been here. He's spoken on our summer series a couple of years ago, and others of you have had an opportunity to hear him before. But after he kind of introduces the subject matter for tonight, we'll start off with some discussion and some questions and just see where the evening takes us. So here's a video that we'll watch a couple minutes long.
Thank you for joining us in this study, Encountering Ecclesiastes, Finding Meaning in a Meaningless World, as a part of the 2020. Thank you for joining us in this study, Encountering Ecclesiastes, Finding Meaning in a Meaningless World, as a part of the 2021 Freed-Hardeman University Lectures. In this session, Dr. Ralph Gilmore, a retired professor from Freed-Hardeman University, a distinguished professor of Bible and philosophy, will be leading us in our study. He regularly writes for various Brotherhood publications, and recently began to work with the Woodbury congregation in Woodbury, Tennessee, where he's serving the church there in a variety of ways. We'll be thinking in this session about encountering labor, finding meaning and rest, from Ecclesiastes 2, verses 18 through 22, and Ecclesiastes 4, verses 4 through 6.
Thank you for being a part of our lectureship this year in 2021 at Freed-Hardeman. Under unusual circumstances, but we appreciate so much the opportunity to come to you. We are going to be talking about encountering Ecclesiastes, finding meaning in a meaningless world. I appreciate the guys who have come before me, but it's kind of odd to be talking about finding meaning in a meaningless world when Solomon, actually in the passages that I've been assigned, seems to be taking the opposite point of view. Work and rest have been messed up, haven't they, during COVID? It's hard to know when to get up. It's hard to know when to go to bed. When you don't go to church regularly, it's hard to know what to do with yourself. I mean, what are we going to do after COVID? It's all messed up.
Right? And so, how many of you are schedule-oriented people? Right? And I knew these two would raise their hand. I like to have a schedule, but my schedule doesn't often or participate with my opinion of what it should do. So, but this was something I wanted to talk about for a minute when we think about how the world has changed, for us over the past year and other changes that have come into our lives. What is your schedule? What does your schedule mean to you, and how has having that schedule thrown into chaos affected your your day-to-day life? What would you say?
Well, my schedule really never changed. I had to tweak it some,
Yeah.
but I went about my daily routine. We were still open at work. It changed in the way you interacted with people,
Right.
more on a technological side, which I had to learn.
Okay, so there
A
was
lot of
where your
that.
life got thrown up.
Anna can vouch for that.
Having to learn some new technology.
Yeah, a lot of new technology stuff, but it all worked out. But even since I retired 6 weeks ago, I still keep a list. I mean,
Really?
I have a checklist of things that I need to do the next day. That's the way I
Right.
stay organized.
Right. So organization, that's what it's
Yep.
about. Yeah. Autumn, what would you?
Well, definitely the schedule's about organization to make sure I get everything done. But I guess with COVID, you learned what was essential and what wasn't.
Yeah.
So all the extra things fell off the schedule. Things that you thought were necessary, but were actually just optional.
Yeah.
Those kind of went away, and you found yourself having to figure out what you were going to do with this newfound time. Because like Terry said, I was still working the same hours, so it was really just my evenings that were more free. But you had to figure out what to do with it.
Right.
And for a list person, for somebody who's organized, I even have to schedule rest. So, even figuring out when you're going to do that is important.
Right. Yep, that's a good point. And that's kind of what I think that this lesson this week, at least in my mind, it ran side by side with a lot of what Rogers and I talked about last week with time. And just there's a sometimes it's time for this and sometimes it's time for this and this other thing. And finding a place for all of those, can be hectic. But we like to have our schedule and our routine. And when that gets taken away from us, it makes things a lot more complicated. But I think that's going to become important in our discussion here of work and rest as we look at how our schedule works and everything like that. He goes on to talk about we're talking about Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We're going to read verses 18 through 23, just to make sure we're all on the same page with the subject matter. So the class series is Encountering Ecclesiastes, Finding Meaning in a Meaningless World. And certainly we've had to readjust what is meaningful to us. And so now, talking about work, it says, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I have toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned out and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. So he's going to talk about labor or work that seems to be useless or pointless. All right, so I have a quick clip that's going to talk about one of the major things he's going to get into in this discussion tonight, and then we'll look at a couple questions. So here's another little 2-minute clip that will get our minds going on this subject.
So what is he talking about here? Well, is that the only reason I work? Because I envy somebody else? I've had some of my students say to me when we were talking about their future, Brother Ralph, I want to be doing what you're doing someday. The truth is, I want them to do that, and I want them to do it better than I. But when you think about it, it's not necessarily envy. So envy and strife is really a good emotion taken to the extreme of sin. Just like the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride or vainglory of life, in 1 John 2:15 through 17, those all begin with emotions that are given to us. The lust of the eyes. Is it wrong to see something that you want and to begin to work for that? Of course not. But what are you willing to do to get it? The lust of the flesh. You say, someday I'm going to be climbing that mountain. Someday I'm going to be doing what that person has done. This past week I went deer hunting for the first time in my life, and I was in the blind with a guy who has shot a deer from 620 yards. I can't even see 620 yards. And so you think, is the guy good? Well, he's been hunting since he was 7 or 8 years old. And he's got enough guns to where he should know what he's doing. So is it wrong to say, someday I would like to be as good a shot as he is? Well, what are you willing to do? And what about the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the vainglory of life? Is it wrong? Matter of fact, Paul would say, no man hates his own flesh in Ephesians chapter 5. So we should not hate our flesh. We should feel good about our bodies. But if you take it to the extreme, then that's when it becomes sin. In the same way, when I am working and I want to be like somebody else to the extent that I will step on anyone or use anyone in a manipulative way in order to try to get there, then it is wrong. I think that that's what Solomon has in mind when he says that we work because of envy.
So meaningless, and it was so depressing that I hated my work, that I hated this life that I was living. And so, anybody ever felt that way before, that just work was tearing you down, that it was, you didn't want to get up and go to work, every day? I mean, apparently not. Apparently everybody loves work every single day. That's great. I'm glad you're happy in your job. I mean, preacher's not going to... But for some of us, we get these times when the alarm clock goes off in the morning and you don't feel like getting up. Maybe that's another way to put it or to look at it. But what are some things, now here in chapter 2, I want to go through some of the things that he will say, but what is your take on that? Why is it that sometimes that work is so difficult, or how is it that work becomes such a burden that it really makes life unbearable sometimes? Or for some people, not necessarily you particularly, but what do you think about when it comes to how difficult life is, or in work?
Well, he's saying that it's meaningless because somebody's just going to come in and take my spot. So what's it all for?
Right.
So if you don't have a proper perspective for why you're working or what you're working for, then it's meaningless. I like the fact that he compared it to 1 Corinthians 15, where it says, that unless you work in the Lord, your labor is in vain. And so if we're working, I view my work as a form of ministry. It's a way that I serve people. I serve God by serving people. If I just looked at it as a paycheck, I would get really frustrated with the people I work with the pay, with all the different things. So it's all about your perspective as to why you have that job, if you're talking about a job.
Right, and I think we are. When I hear work and labor here, initially I'm just thinking about our daily, vocation, what we're called to do. Brother Lewis? Right, yeah, I believe you're correct. And he mentions that phrase, under the sun. If there is no God, and that's, Ralph does a good job talking about the secular world. It says, Ecclesiastes is not from an atheist's point of view, okay? There were no atheists in the ancient world, okay? You believed that some kind of spirit or some kind of being or some kind of something was in control of all these things that you could not explain. And so it wasn't a matter of being not believing in these, spiritual creatures. It was a matter of, do I live believing in and living for God, or do I live for the moment? And that's what secular means, this moment in time, the here and the now. The phrase that Solomon uses is life under the sun. And so, under the sun, it's all going to be meaningless. And so what Solomon does is take every good thing in your life, everything that we're supposed to find joy in, love and family and work and honest, making an honest living, and he shows how without God, it's pointless. It's meaningless. Rogers?
That's like a point about loving your work. I love my work and that's about it. Those on you. Don't have love her work. That's in high school. This is something like you. In fact, she loves it so much. When she retired, she went over and worked for free to help show those people
What?
how to make this.
What?
And those who made it like Joanne did, so the manager had to end up buying sold and business. So she couldn't make it.
Well, bless your heart.
Joanne worked so much over there and worked for free.
So for the video, talking about how much we love work, working for free after you've had the chance to retire or step back away from it, and Joanne stepping back from work but still coming in for free. You still going over to the office for free, Terry?
I dropped by and checked, but I've always said life
Anna's back there going, nope.
I've always said life is too short not to enjoy what you do.
Right.
Because I don't know about y'all, but Charles Watkins told me one time that if you work half a day every day, you'll be successful.
That's the
But,
truth.
but then he went on to say half a day is 12 hours.
Yeah, good luck with that.
So, if you work 12 hours a day, whether it's all at work on your paying job or work at home,
Right.
I mean, it takes that to get things done. But I always told my boys growing up, you need to be happy in what career you choose.
Yeah.
Because life is way too short. I was blessed. I had good people to work with. Loved my job. Never dreaded going to work. I put more pressure on myself than anybody.
Anybody else did, yeah.
But I like what he says here. He says if one hates one's life, then it is likely that one will also hate his or her work. It would be very difficult to hate one's job and still love one's life.
Right. I had that highlighted
Yeah,
too.
because
Yeah. We spend so much time there.
Exactly.
It's going to take up so much of our lives that we need to be investing in doing something that also brings us fulfillment, and happiness.
And if your job is miserable, you're going to bring it home to your family.
Yeah, it's hard.
And that creates problems.
Anybody ever had a temporary job that they hated and they were really glad when they got to quit that job? I could not. I worked at Pizza Hut as long as I physically could. And then it was, let them throw me out on the street. I'm not paying my rent. I'm not working at Pizza Hut anymore. I just can't do it. But then those jobs make you appreciate the good opportunities that you have later on. And luckily, there are other people who like the jobs that I don't like, and I like the jobs that they don't like. But so there's that perspective. I think perspective is a big part of it. He talks about it here a little bit. The first thing that he says in chapter 2 is, first of all, our work is meaningless because it benefits other people and not ourselves. And that's what he's like. If I build this empire, if I work hard and I use all of my skill and labor and I leave it to somebody else, he says there's two things I don't know. Will they know what to do with it? And are they going to be intelligent enough, or are they going to be foolish? Are they going to squander it? And then the second thing he says is maybe I leave it to somebody and they don't appreciate because they didn't have to what?
Work for it.
They didn't have to work for it. That's exactly right. And so from those two perspectives, he's like, why should I build up this inheritance? Why should I build up this business or spend this time on this endeavor when I leave it behind? Somebody else is going to take it and do something with it that I don't have any control over. And then he also goes on to say in verse 22 that I don't get a benefit from it. I'm working all day, and I'm working myself to the bone, and then I can't even get a good night's rest at night. And his perspective is off, and that's causing him to find no pleasure in what he is doing.
But what he's doing is trying to find happiness in the wrong place.
Exactly.
Happiness is not things. Happiness is being content with what God has blessed you with.
I had that word contentment written down here because this guy in Ecclesiastes, he doesn't know how to find contentment,
Right.
does he? He doesn't know how to be content.
Well, he's looking for happiness in all the wrong places.
Mm-hmm. He's chasing.
He's
And that's
chasing.
what
That's
the
what
next,
chapter 4 is about.
and that's it. Chapter 4, the next chapter, verses 6 through 8.
4 through 6.
Chapter 4, verses 6,
4 through 6.
4 through 6. Yeah, that's right. Chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. So there are two passages that have been combined here. I saw all the toil and all the skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after the wind. So verse 6 is what I'm thinking about there. We've got so many people that, and he mentions it in the lesson, in the video. Ask Warren Buffett, how many dollars does he need?
Right.
And the answer is $1 more than I have. They're never satisfied. They're never content.
But I don't think it's just money.
Well, no, it's certainly
Because,
not just money.
I think about mom envy and, mom competition.
Yeah.
And there are so many women that get so caught up in trying to live up to an ideal that they see on social media.
Right.
They don't think they're a good enough mom unless they work this much harder and unless they make this concession, unless they do this extra thing for their kids or for their husbands. And so that's a form of work, and that's something that a lot of women get caught up in, even if they don't work outside the home, is this jealousy to be like this image of a woman
And
that
then
really doesn't exist.
still be happy and have
But
your
they're supposed to still act happy, and and
Right.
what they are is they're so consumed. I mean, it says he consumes his own flesh. Women get so consumed that they eat themselves alive from working so hard, and there's nothing to show for it because you haven't even enjoyed your family.
Yeah. Feel empty.
Right.
So I think that idea of contentment and never being satisfied, what is it that we chase? That's the bottom line. Some people chase money. Some people need that next dollar, but other people want that image. They want to be the influencer. They want to have the most followers or, something like that. And then other people want to have the perfect family or, have at least it looks perfect, to other people.
We chase different things at different ages.
Yeah. He had a question, in one of his study questions at the end was, what alternatives to Jesus have I used to try to fix the spiritual problems in my life, and how has that worked for me? Now, I don't automatically think about these things as alternatives to Jesus,
Right.
but that's what they are. Mm-hmm. When I'm chasing that stuff, that's because I think it's going to solve a problem for me. I think it's going to make me feel satisfied. I think it's going to help me. And so, I don't know if y'all answered that question. Did y'all think about that and put it down any response or anything? Maybe not you personally, but what some people do, but it all boils down to what they're chasing.
So many people forget the most important thing, and that is, and he refers to it in this video as balance in their lives. They've got it all out of kilter. You can be successful in your work, but if you fail at home, you failed.
Right.
It doesn't matter how successful you are on the job.
Right.
And so many people they spend so much time at work and they don't spend time at home. And he mentions one other thing in here, and I've said this for years. He says, I'm convinced that children would rather have more time with their parents than to have an accumulation of quote-unquote things. And, you know, you see it all around you. Children are, they want you to spend time with them, quality time with them,
Right.
doing things that they want to do. So we need to be mindful of that because we're all busy. We could all fill up our whole
The whole schedule.
the whole schedule with things to
Chasing
do,
after
but,
that
but you
stuff.
got to remember what's important. I can remember when my kids were smaller and we were going in all different directions. Some people didn't know that Marcia was my wife because we were all in different vehicles. We was always in different vehicles. And I pulled up one day and somebody said, "Is that your wife?" I said, "Yeah. Yeah, we've been married 20-something years."
Yep.
So, you know, I know how people are busy. So you got to make time for important things.
Yeah, Amy. Go ahead. No, go now. Right now, yeah. Right. Yep, that's exactly right. We look at what we don't have. That's what we do most of the time. So for the camera, for the internet folks, you know, regret. That's what Amy talks about. And that's what a lot of us lug around with us is regrets for, you know, looking back and not being thankful for the blessings that we have, not being thankful for the things that were there because we were so busy focused on the things that aren't there. And then one of the things that causes us that pursuit, I think, is this word that he does bring up, this in chapter 4 and verse 4, this envy that we have for other people. And I think he brings up an important part, and I thought that, Terry, you might, you know, want to talk about this a little bit too, because he says, is envy the same thing as competition? You know, envy's a bad thing. Does that mean that, you know, comparing yourself to other people, that's kind of what envy is, and that's also what competition is. And so are we saying that competition is a bad thing, or are we saying that there's a line and a distinction?
Well, and he mentioned lads to leaders as an example. It can be really good because it brings out the best in the participants. But if you take it too far, then it can become
a problem.
A problem.
That's right.
Yes,
Even a sin. It can cross into
and that's
sin.
the same in anything. It's the same in your work. Doing the best that you can do is, if you do the very best that you can do, you need to be content with that. But if you don't give it your all, regardless of what your work is, you're sacrificing. You're hurting those that you're working for,
Right.
first of all.
They're having to carry you.
They're having to carry you. You're sacrificing. You're not making the best benefit for your family.
Mm-hmm.
So that's.
It's just so easy to think,
It
you know,
is.
if I'm giving my best, what does it mean to give my best? Well, I got to be there 100 hours. And that's not what that means.
No.
Well,
You
I
know.
think I think you go back to that first lesson that Dan Winkler said, our purpose here is to bring glory to God.
Right.
So if my idea of success is that I have glorified God in my work, then I'm successful.
Right. And you don't
And-
have to be at work 100 hours to bring glory to God.
Because you're not bringing glory to God if
Now
you are
you
at work
cross that
100
line.
hours. Right.
And-
If you're trying to bring glory to yourself, you can't be bringing glory to God. And so, so that perspective matters.
Right. I think Gilmore, talks about that a little bit here too. He talks about being missional is a word that he uses. That's kind of a buzzword, but the idea that, keeping in mind, whatever I do it to the glory of God. Do it to bring glory to God. And then you've already mentioned, 1 Corinthians 15, our labor in the Lord is not in vain. And so even though all of this has no meaning, he says, here is the way to bring meaning into your work and into your life, is to do it with the right perspective. It's not just about bringing a paycheck home. It is about more than that. But our work is important. He also brings out Ecclesiastes 9, and I wanted to bring that up. And it's possible somebody else will cover this in a future lesson, but he's not saying that work is bad. He's not saying, take off from work as much as you possibly can, because in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10, it reminds us, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you're going. He says the time will come when you can't do any more work. So for now, while it's daylight, whatever your hand finds to do it to the best of your ability, because that does bring glory to God. Thinking about that, how much time we devote to certain things, because we're going to get into this golden mean now, because that's what, Terry's already mentioned it. I know Autumn has some thoughts here about finding balance, and how does finding balance help us to enjoy life? A lot of us have a bunch of different things. We're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. Terry, you mentioned that, a minute ago. When our kids are young, our life kind of revolves around them. And when you got 3 kids doing 3 different activities, and you've got to be at 3 places at the same time, and there's only 2 adults, that gets really challenging. So what do you do with the hours in the day? Am I wrong here? Does anybody in here have 25 hours in the day? No. Is there anybody in here who only gets 23 hours in their day? Okay, Brent only has 23 hours in his day. So somewhere he's living on perpetual daylight savings time island, and he has an hour, But how many of us feel like we only have 20 hours in a day, We all have the exact same number of hours, right? And so it's how do we make the most of that time, and how do we do the best with that? And I had to learn trial and error the hard way. I think I guess I'm glad Autumn's on the panel, because she can verify. For a long time, I wasn't good with that. Hopefully the camera doesn't have good enough quality. You can see her grinning about how much she'd like to say about that. But I didn't say no, ever. If anybody wanted me for anything all the time, I was like, okay, I've got a 10-minute window between this thing and this thing, so, that. And learning how to schedule myself a little bit better. Hopefully I'm better at that now. One of the things I had to learn was, it started with the fire department, was really the first place where I realized I could spend all my time at the fire department. Just as a volunteer, just being up there, there's always work that needs to be done. I could also spend all my time at the house fixing things that are broken, or, working in the yard or doing something. I could spend all my time at the church building, and there would always be something to do. There would always be work. There would always be somebody to study with. There would always be somebody to visit. There would always be something to read or to learn. So instead of saying, I've got to be here all the time, what I had to learn how to do was say, when I am here 100%. For me, this question of balance was, for instance, I can't run every call that the fire department gets, even though it's an emergency. It may be a life or death situation. I can't be there for every single one of those calls. No volunteer can, by the way. Nobody can. So what I had to learn to do was say, here are the times when I'm available. And if I'm at the fire department, then 100% of my attention is given to doing the work that needs to be done here. Where that was the most meaningful is at home. Because for a long time, I was home physically, but I wasn't home mentally. You know, you bring home work with you or something like that. And so there were times when I'd be sitting at the house, but I'm so busy on my computer or on my phone or talking to somebody or getting ready for the next day, tomorrow or something like that, that, you know, it doesn't do any good. And so I had to apply that at the house, which seems counterintuitive. It seems like I should know better. But it's so easy to be distracted by the future or distracted by what happened yesterday that I'm not 100% at home. And so when I'm home, I'm home. You know, at least that's the goal. Deirdre? Essentialism? Huh.
Family, there's health, there's friends, and there's work. And we can't keep all 4 burners, so we have to decide at what time in our life what is essential.
Interesting. So like the stove analogy, there's 4 burners on your stove. And if I remember correctly, you said family, health, work, and friends. Yeah. And you can't have all of them going at the same time. You can't be on all 4 burners. You know, you want to be, but you can't. So you have to manage that time. Good.
I like the point that I think in this video,
Uh-huh.
the church hired you, the preacher, they didn't hire all of them,
Right.
but she's your wife, so she got to be included in this thing.
She's a part of it. She's a part of the team, but she's not getting a paycheck last time I checked. But that's true. That is a good point. In fact, that is the next video clip we're going to watch. I thought, again, I did not do this intentionally, but I've got the preacher's wife and one of the elders up here, so we're going to watch the video where he talks about, you know, how the elders treat the preacher's wife, and we're going to see what happens.
We're talking about spending time and balancing things. I learned a long time ago that if you don't plan your day, in the job I was in, your day would
Will
plan you.
That's right.
And you would get nothing done.
That's right.
So
You'll be chasing birds all
you had to have your day planned in order to get things done.
Yeah.
Anna knows it. Where would she go?
She disappeared.
She disappeared.
She ran
But
away.
it could get real chaotic real quick if you didn't have a plan every day.
Right. Yeah.
And we teach our kids by our busyness.
Busyness.
You know, I know that electronics have contributed to the anxiety in the younger generation, but I think that our busy schedules have too. And we make people feel like they have to be busy all the time. And so when somebody has downtime, they don't know what to do with their brain.
Right.
Because
We don't know how to be quiet.
We have no idea how to be quiet with our thoughts and how to rest. And that's a major, I mean, that's a Bible problem. That's not just an American problem. That's a Bible problem.
Yep.
So I think that contributes too.
And that rest, that's where we're going to get to next. But Autumn, I know you have a mantra, you know, that's your motto in life, so I didn't want to leave the topic of balance, finding the middle ground. You know, he talks about Aristotle and, you know, what's on one end of the spectrum, he uses examples like cowards, but on the other end of the spectrum is the fool. Well, what's in the middle? You don't want to be a coward who runs away from trouble all the time, and you also don't want to be a fool who just jumps into the fray. What's the middle of that? That's bravery. You know, that's courage. But you don't want to fall off on either end, and so the balance, the middle ground, is what matters. What did you have, or do you want to contribute anything to this concept of balance before we watch the last?
No, just to say that, I mean, extremes are almost always bad.
Extremes are
That's
almost
just something
always
we've always taught our kids. Extremes in either direction are almost always going to get you in trouble. And so like in this topic particularly, being too busy is a problem, being lazy is a problem.
Right.
You've got to find that middle, and you've got to learn how to rest. Rest is an active thing.
Like you said, you have to schedule rest.
Right.
Because it's so important, it's so
Right.
critical. And it's one of the burners, and Deidre mentioned, you know, your health is dependent upon your ability to rest. How many of us have experienced what happens if you run yourself ragged and you don't intentionally take time out? What does your body do?
It forces you.
Yeah, you're going to wake up one morning and you can't get out of bed because you've got a 24-hour bug. Well, part of that is probably because your body is saying, look, buddy, you weren't listening to all the clues I was sending you, so we're just going to stay home today, you know, Congratulations.
One of the things that I think was a big eye-opener for me is the fact that rest is a trust issue with God.
Rest is a trust issue with God.
We feel like we can't rest because we think the world is going to stop spinning if we stop doing stuff. And rest is an acknowledgement that God's going to handle it. God's got it. And the fact that we feel the need, that we feel like we're so important that we have to be doing something all the time, means that we're leaning way too much on our own understanding and on our own abilities. And we're not trusting God to handle our lives.
That's a good point. Your job will post quicker than your obituary. That's a good way to look at it.
That is true.
Once you're out, they'll find your next one. That's true. That's right. That's this next video, divine rest.
Different people rest in different ways.
Right.
I rest by working outside.
I rest by working.
I mean,
Y'all heard
that's-
that. But it's true. Cutting the grass
I
is
mean,
sometimes I don't have to turn my brain on to cut
Yeah,
the grass, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So finding something, a task that is, that is manual and I can just lose myself in that. Absolutely. That's going to be the next after this video. So we'll watch this video and then we'll talk about what you do intentionally to rest. So.
Another concept in understanding God's theology of work is that if you don't do this right, it's going to hurt your work as a preacher, it's going to hurt your work as a husband, as a father, and if you can't find an appropriate balance for this, it's one of those things that you'll be regretting on the day that you die. So what you need to do is to think about, okay, have I spent enough time with my children, my grandchildren? How does my wife factor into my work? I asked recently, the Jenkins Institute had up this amount of advertisement. We had a retreat for preachers. So I asked my wife, who is a preacher's wife, and I asked my daughter, who's a preacher's daughter, or at least a minister's daughter, what do these men need to hear? And you know what they said? They said they need to hear that the congregation did not hire me. The congregation hired the preacher. Now, should the preacher's wife be a part of showers and, dinners on the ground and visiting the sick and all that? Sure. But the church did not hire my wife. So I need to understand that I've got to make a place for her. Because if you don't, you're not going to be worth much in the pulpit anyway. When we think about this, then, the value of rest is also important in the Bible, as we see in Ephesians 4:6. The Shabbat is the Hebrew word for Sabbath. And as we think about it, God didn't rest, but He ceased activity because He doesn't need to rest like a man needs to rest or a woman needs to rest. A man works from sun to sun, and a woman's work is never done. But He ceased activity. And the fact that God ceased activity on that day gives us a basis for the Sabbath day in Exodus 20.
Rest is what we're looking for. Unfortunately, that spawned the phrase, I'll rest when I'm dead. That is not what God means here in the Bible. The point is, sometimes we have to find that balance so that we can continue on. If you asked me to pick up 10,000 pounds right now, you would be sorely disappointed in my performance. There's just no way around that. But I know that at the YMCA they have these circuit machines that have little computers on them, and I can go up to this central screen and I can put in my little code, and it will keep track of all the exercises I do on all those machines over the next hour, hour and a half, or 20 minutes, But anyway. But what it will do is it will tell me at the end of that workout, when I go over there and I punch my name in or my number, it will tell me cumulatively how much weight I've lifted. Now, I never put more than 100, 120 pounds on any of those machines, but by the time I've done 3 reps of 10 sets or, blah, 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 all that stuff, there's 15, 20,000 pounds that I've lifted over the course of that hour, and that puts it in a new perspective. I can't do all this work immediately right now. I have to space it out with periods of rest, with the opportunity to intentionally practice resting, rejuvenating myself. After you give the first part of your paycheck to the Lord, what's the next part of your paycheck? What should the next part of your paycheck go to? Who knows the answer to that one? It goes to your retirement. They're supposed to. You're supposed to pay yourself. That's what they call it. And until I understood that concept, we didn't have a retirement plan. We didn't save any money for first 10 years of our marriage because I didn't pay myself first. So when that money goes out now, I don't even see it. That's the point, is that it's just, I don't think about that as actual income. Well, you have to do the same thing with rest. What's the last thing you want to say?
Terry mentioned that rest doesn't mean not doing anything.
Right.
And so this last question on our thing was some weekly rest practices that I'm currently committed to. I started doing yoga because it was a time I wasn't allowed to have my phone for an hour.
Right.
And when I first started, that was a really big deal to me, was being able to not have my phone anywhere near me for an hour out of the day. And the first 2 times I sat in yoga, I just sat and cried through the whole, not because I didn't have my phone, but because I had been so tense. I was so tense all day long that opportunity to relax was just so foreign to me. I did not know what to do.
I cry in yoga because my body doesn't bend that way. It's a totally different scenario.
But now my phone goes to silent at 9 o'clock, so I don't take any more calls or texts after 9 o'clock. I do lunch, by myself, and people think that's weird, but that's time for me to rest from the noise of the world. But I'm always studying at lunch, so I'm doing something, but there's just not that noise and busyness around me. And so you just have to find what works for you.
Find what works for you.
Right.
Yeah. Terry, what do you want to say?
Well, if you're going to work hard, give it all you got. And if you're going to play hard.
There you go.
And playing to some people is different things, but if I'm going to play, I'm going to do something I enjoy doing.
Now we're getting back to that competitive stuff, right?
Yeah. So
being competitive is restful.
Some of the stuff I do playing, some people would say, you're crazy. That's too much work. But, you got to find what you enjoy doing.
It's something that you enjoy doing.
What gives you an outlet.
That's exactly right. Well, I appreciate your contributions tonight. I appreciate both of you. Again, I've got some open spots in the end of April and into May. I'd love to have some more volunteers, but we'll look forward to being again together next week and continuing on our study in Ecclesiastes. Look for the video on Facebook, online, on our website, somewhere over the next week, and get a heads up about what our discussion will be. And we'll see you, Lord willing, next time we meet. Thank you.